Hey team, it's Andre from High Performance Academy, and I'd like to welcome you all along to our Race Driving Fundamentals webinar. I'm going to give you a quick introduction here so you can know what to expect from today's webinar, and while I'm doing that, I'd love it if you could let us know in the chat whereabouts in the world you're joining us from. It'd be great to know what sort of cars you're also driving. I'll jump into the chat in a moment and make a few introductions and see who we've got in there. Before we do that though, I just want to mention that this webinar today, we are hosting in conjunction with JG from Grassroots Motorsport magazine. We're going to bring JG in a few moments and get him to do an introduction so you can get an understanding of what his experience with race driving is and what exactly Grassroots Motorsport magazine is. The lesson today is going to run for around about 45 minutes, and we're going to cover a few of the key topics when it comes to race driving. And really what we're focusing on here is more at the grassroots enthusiast, weekend warrior kind of level. And what we find, particularly for the majority of us who come from road cars and then want to maybe get involved with some track days on the odd weekend, or maybe even want to start competing in an actual series, there is a huge difference between the skill level that the average enthusiast has and what we see from a professional race driver. And you maybe think that you're cutting some exceptionally quick lap times, but you'd be surprised usually if you actually put a pro driver in the car. Normally they're going to probably be a few seconds up the road quicker than you. However, there are some really simple aspects that we can focus on when it comes to improving our own race driving, and that's what we're going to focus on during our lesson today. Now, there's obviously a lot to take in here. We've diluted this down into some of the key aspects. So the first topic we're going to cover in detail is braking and brake application. And I know you're probably thinking to yourself, braking, how hard is this? It's pretty simple, right? Actually, this is one of the trickier aspects of race driving, and the techniques that we use on the road, very different to what we use on the racetrack, and this is one of the key areas that most enthusiasts will be giving away a huge amount of time. The second topic we're going to move into, and it's a nice segue from braking, is called trail braking, or in other words, how we release the brake pedal. And this is as we bleed off the brakes as we begin to turn into the corner. Again, very different to our road driving techniques, and there is a lot of time to be made up in trail braking. We can also manipulate the handling balance of the car with our trail braking. The last topic we're going to cover, if we've got sufficient time, we're going to look at some of the techniques we can use to improve our driving, such as whereabouts to look, driver vision. And again, this is something that most drivers at the enthusiast level simply overlook. But making sure that you're looking at the right part of the track is really critical. We'll also talk briefly about simulators and onboard video, things that you can do to really improve your driving. At the end of the lesson, we are going to run a question and answer session as well. We'll actually take some questions from the viewers while we're going through this, but at the end, we'll have a more detailed rundown. So if there's anything that I talk about today or anything generally related to the topic of race driving, feel free to ask those questions in the chat as we go, and we'll do our best to get to those. I will ask you to hold off with those questions until we get into these topics. We will put a shout out for them. This is why we're just going to make sure that we don't miss any of them. All right, we'll quickly jump into our chat now and have a quick look and see who we've got joining us. We've got Marcus Hamilton and Joseph Ruth in here. We've got Eddie Renisma, I think it is, driving a 2010 Viper. We've got Max B in here. We've got Todd joining us, Todd Hayden joining us with an 03 Infiniti G35. We've got Johnny Woods joining us with an 04 Honda Accord. We've got Mark joining us from Berryville. 10 minutes from Summit Point Motorsport Park. I've done a few laps around Summit Point on the simulator. I'd love to drive there in real life. It's an amazing track. Kevin Boswell joining us with a 92 Corvette. We've got Joshua Bigwood joining us from Alaska with an 05 Forester XT, and we've got Samuel joining us from Chicago, Illinois with a 2016 4.7 Ford Fusion. I'll leave it there because otherwise I'm going to spend the rest of our lesson just introducing people and welcoming them along, but it is great to have so many of you online. And while I'm talking about this as well, if you are watching on our website today, not YouTube, then you will see at the top of the chat there is a blue Facebook sharing button. I'd really appreciate it if you could take a moment out of your time to punch that button. It's going to let your friends on Facebook know that you're watching this lesson today. And if your friends are anything like you are, chances are they'll also enjoy coming along and joining in. And why that's important is when we get to our Q&A session, the more people we've got online, the more questions we're going to get, the more answers JG and I will be able to provide. And this way, everyone's going to learn more. All right, with our brief introduction there out of the way, what I want to do is just step back a little bit and give you a quick idea on who High Performance Academy is. As I said, we'll bring JG in a moment as well. He can introduce himself in Grassroots Motorsport. And for those who aren't aware, High Performance Academy is an online training school. We are actually streaming from Queenstown, which is in the South Island of New Zealand. So opposite side of the world to JG from Grassroots Motorsport. High Performance Academy, as I mentioned, online training school. We've been in business now for about 8 years, and over the majority of those years we've been focusing on teaching people how to tune EFI, how to build performance engines, and also how to complete quality, reliable wiring harnesses. We had a lot of questions over the time though on topics related to race driver education, so we have branched out over the last 2 years. We now offer courses on race driver education, race driving techniques, which is what we're focusing on today, as well as car setup, suspension, wheel alignment, and also how to improve your car and your driving with data analysis. Over the 8 odd years that we've been in business at this point, we've helped about 75,000 people from all around the world who have joined up and taken our courses learn those topics that I've just mentioned. And today we are focusing on the race driving fundamentals side of our business. And for those who enjoy what you learn as we go through this, we also have a really special webinar package deal that we're going to offer at the end. It's going to be perfect for those of you who like what you see and want to take your knowledge to the next level. However, there's going to be a lot of juicy information in here, regardless whether you buy that package or not. It is important before we move on just to mention that I personally am not a professional race driver. I am a budding enthusiast, so probably similar to a lot of you who may be watching. I have been racing for a fair while. Started when I was about 12 or 13 with karts. I just want to quickly jump across to my laptop screen and show you the most recent car that we have been driving. This has been evolved over a few years of ownership now. It is a 2013 Toyota GT86. Started out with a 4-litre Toyota V8, and more recently we have fitted to it a Nissan SR20 VE turbo engine. Obviously, as you can see, got a bit of aero on the car now as well. So we've got that SR20 sitting in there, 2-litre still to fit in the class that we want to run with. It's got a Garrett GT30 turbocharger. For endurance racing, which is what we're using it for, we're making around about 450 wheel horsepower, running about 15 PSI of boost. And just to show that I can actually steer a car reasonably well, we're actually fresh off a win at the first round of our local endurance series, which was held at our local racetrack. So pretty excited to get that win under our belt. So again, I'm not a professional driver. What we've actually done for our race driving fundamentals courses, we've teamed up with a professional driver. And because I've got that understanding of what we need to know from an enthusiast level, basically we distilled their 20 years of race driving knowledge and presented a course with all of the information that I know personally as an enthusiast I wanted to know in order to be able to help improve my own driving. Just a point there, that course has done exactly that. With that course, I actually managed to end up reducing my lap times at our local track by about a second. So just to give you an idea of what is actually possible. All right, enough talking about myself though. Let's get JG in here. So we'll bring JG in. Welcome along, JG. Thanks for hosting this webinar with us. And obviously we're going out to the GRM viewers as well. Can you start maybe by just giving us a really brief rundown on what Grassroots Motorsport is, please?
Oh, I'd be happy to. So, and actually, that Toyota 86 is the perfect segue because that is a car that if you are into cars like that, you are a Grassroots Motorsports fan. Like our magazine, it's a U.S. based magazine. We're out of the Daytona Beach, Florida area, although we cover amateur motorsports all over the U.S. But we have a worldwide readership because we cover not only competition that takes place in the U.S., but our main focus is on on tech, on driving techniques, on how to exist in this world of amateur motorsports that we're all trying to do. You know, Andre mentioned that he's not a professional race car driver, and neither am I, but both of us have been doing it for a good portion of our lives, and we've devoted a lot of effort to it. And so have a lot of our readers and a lot of our viewers tonight. I'm seeing a lot of names in the comment section of folks that I've shared a track with before. So we're a pretty knowledgeable group of track enthusiasts. So when we kind of sat down to work on the program tonight, I was kind of getting the HP Academy folks to go a little more granular, a little more hardcore. A, because that's kind of what I wanted to see, and B, because, you know, our fans, our readers are a real knowledgeable group, and they appreciate really solid, really granular, really detailed information. So if you're into the kind of stuff we're talking about tonight, if you're into cool cars and cool stuff to do with them, whether it's, you know, time trial, time attack, road racing, autocross, or slalom, or whatever you call it in the country that you happen to be watching from tonight, check us out online at grassrootsmotorsports.com, and we will hook you up from there. If you can't subscribe to the print magazine because you're across the ocean, you can subscribe to the digital edition, or you can just consume the content on our website. So yeah, thanks to HP Academy for having us along tonight, and thanks to the GRM regulars who are here getting to check out something a little bit new tonight.
Perfect. All right, thanks for that, JG. And yeah, be sure to check out Grassroots Motorsport magazine. Let's jump into our actual lesson. And before we get into brake application, what I just wanted to mention here, which I think is something I've seen through my whole career. I didn't mention that prior to founding High Performance Academy, I owned a performance workshop. So we tuned and dealt with a lot of race cars. And one of the things I see a lot of enthusiasts fall into the trap of is trying to improve their lap times by adding more power to the car. And yes, that's going to work, but time and time again, I find the cheapest form of improving your lap times is actually focusing on your own driving. And also, if your driving is better, you're going to actually be able to extract more out of a more powerful car. If you're not a very competent driver, adding more power can actually be pretty dangerous. So I just wanted to clear that up. This is honestly the cheapest form of lap time you're going to find. So let's get into brake application as our first topic, and I'll just remind you again, we're going to be stopping through this. We'll bring JG back in and we'll cover a couple of questions as we go. So if you do have questions, we're going to restrict this purely to this topic right now. We'll have more general questions at the end, but feel free to ask any questions on brake application. We'll jump into those. So as I mentioned at the start, this is one of the most common areas that the average track day enthusiast is just giving away bucket loads of time during the lap, and it might not seem that obvious initially. A lot of the problem comes from people who have spent a decade or so driving their street car around on the street, and the problem is that the braking application, the braking technique we use on the street is vastly different to what we need to use on the racetrack. So let's just dive over to my laptop screen for a moment here, and we'll just have a look at a quick graphic. This is some data which I'm going to be showing you quite a bit of data as we go. Don't get too worried about it. I'm going to explain exactly what we're looking at as we go, and we'll sort of get an understanding of why that's important. So let's have a look at our brake pressure trace here. And what we've got here, the white line is from a pro driver and the red line is from an amateur driver. So what we've got here is, sorry, actually we've got it around the other way. What we've got is the white line is from the amateur driver, the red line is from the pro. That's going to make a lot more sense. So a couple of obvious issues here with this data. First of all, our amateur driver here has got on the brakes way earlier. Don't have the number here, but this is about 17 meters difference on the racetrack. So that's a huge distance difference where the driver's actually getting on the brakes. The other thing we can see is that the actual brake trace looks a bit different. The brake pressure gradually builds up, and we can see the actual peak pressure here compared to the red line, which is our pro, also vastly different. So what that results in, the difference we can see is where the pro jumps on the brakes, obviously much later as we've already mentioned, and the pro builds up that pressure peak pressure is a lot higher. So what this allows the driver to do is, first of all, hold more speed into the initial part of the braking. That's why he can brake later. And then because of that additional pressure, essentially the driver is using more of the available retardation from the tires, more of that available grip to slow the car down quicker. So he can hold more speed into that initial part of the corner, but still actually slow the car down to the correct speed to get through the apex. And then we've got the bleed off of the brakes, which we're going to talk about in a bit more detail. So that's a really key difference. The takeaways there: amateur drivers generally, they're going to get on the brakes too early, and they're going to build up pressure too slowly, and also not get anywhere near the maximum amount of retardation or grip that are available from the tires, basically not exploiting the amount of grip that's there. And again, a lot of this comes from road car driving technique and a bit of a fear, which is understandable when we get out on the racetrack. Now, if we look at how this actually affects the car speed, this is our next slide here. So we're coming up to our top trace here, which is our car speed. Essentially, everything we do with our driving technique when we're trying to reduce our lap times is all about keeping more car speed, maximizing our car speed through the lap. So let's have a look at a couple of elements here. So first of all, we can see this green trace here that I've just highlighted. This is where the amateur driver has jumped on the brakes. And what we can also see is the amateur driver already is a little bit slower at the braking point. The professional driver's braked here. At that point, they're holding around about 8 to 10 kilometers an hour more speed. I will apologize for those of you who work in Imperial, but I think you could probably understand the magnitude of these numbers. The key point here though is with this braking technique, as I've already mentioned, by the time the pro driver is off the brakes, we can see that the speed has actually matched the amateur driver. So a couple of takeaways there. The amateur driver actually seemingly here has about the right speed to get through the apex of the corner, which is the slowest point of the corner, but they've taken a lot longer to slow the car down to that point. The pro driver has got on the brakes later, more aggressively, slowed the car down quicker, so he's been able to brake later, but still get down to that minimum speed. And really, the gain in lap time is going to come from the delta between these two speed traces during that braking phase. This can be massive. It's not uncommon to see the difference in that delta there just in one braking segment as much as 3 to 5 tenths of a second, and you add that up over all of the braking zones around a racetrack, and understandably that's a huge amount of time that the amateur is giving away. All right, so we'll move on now as well, and we'll just get an understanding of, this is a slightly more advanced topic, but an understanding of how the actual tire works and why we want to be right on the limit of the tire's adhesion. So let's look at our next slide, and this topic here relies on an understanding of the term slip ratio. So basically what we need to understand here is that the amount of grip that the tire provides, which is obviously what we're trying to optimize when we are under brakes, is relative to its slip ratio, or how it's slipping across the racetrack. So you might think that if we've got the tire slipping across the racetrack, we could consider this to be a partial lockup or an under rotation of the wheel. That's not something that's going to be beneficial. But when we actually look at this plot here, we find that a small amount of slip is actually an advantage. So what we've got here on the horizontal axis is our slip ratio. Essentially, how much faster or slower the tire is rotating relative to the racetrack that it's moving across. So down at the bottom here, we've got braking, and of course up the top here, we've got acceleration. So we actually see this in both acceleration and braking. And the key point here is that we can see what happens is that around about 5%, it's not always going to be 5%, it's going to be very dependent on the tire, we end up with a maximum amount of longitudinal force. So that's the point we're actually interested in here. So by getting a little bit of under rotation, we can actually end up with more longitudinal force, more braking force, and we can slow the car down faster. This segues into two different topics here. First of all, if we considered a professional driver, let's take someone at the top of their game in Formula One. they will actually purposely use this to their advantage, trying to get a slight under rotation of the tires in these bigger braking zones so that they can maximize that longitudinal force, get the maximum braking force available. For the average enthusiast and the track day warrior, this is probably not a technique I would suggest you want to start focusing on, because what it does is it has us right on the edge of locking up the wheels. I just want to explain that this is a situation that's actually happening with our tires, and the amount of force or grip that they provide is dependent on their slip ratio. So going too far here is obviously going to end up locking a wheel. When we lock up the wheels, the longitudinal force dramatically reduces. If we're locked up the front of the car, we also no longer have any steering. So it is a fine line, but that's where we're trying to aim for. This is also what Motorsports spec ABS systems are actually trying to achieve. They're trying to get those tires, all four of them, to be constantly on the optimal slip ratio. So that's kind of an understanding of what's actually going on with the tires. We're going to get into a couple of questions in just a moment on this topic. I do want to just cover on one more aspect here, which is again really easy to overlook with our braking, and this is actually what happens before we ever get onto the brake pedal. So let's have another look at some data here, and what we're looking at here is the transition between our throttle and our brake pedal. Most drivers at the enthusiast level aren't left foot braking, so we're using the same foot on the throttle as we're using on the brake pedal. And what we want to do here is just be mindful when we're on the track that when we're coming up to a big braking zone, we're actually obviously starting from full throttle acceleration. So we're accelerating up to our braking marker. And a lot of enthusiasts, their tendency will be to quite slowly transition off the throttle, and then there'll be a period of time, maybe a couple of tenths of a second, where they're neither accelerating nor braking, and then they'll transition their foot across to the brake pedal and then go through what we've already looked at, that slow gradual build up in pressure and not getting enough peak pressure. So we can see here that transition, and this is pretty typical here. We've got maximum throttle there, and it's not until this point here where there is a little bit of brake pressure started to be applied. So just being conscious of this when you're out on the track, understanding that particularly at the end of a long straight where the car's traveling really fast, is covering a lot of ground every second or every tenth of a second. So the quicker we can transition from our throttle pedal to our brake pedal, the later we're going to be able to brake. And again, just like we looked at in that previous slide, that's going to give us an improvement in our entry speed, and that's going to result in a reduction in our lap times. All right, so enough talking from me. Let's bring JG back in here, and we'll have a quick chat about that. And first of all, JG, have we got any questions on that, or anything that you wanted to maybe note about that topic of braking so far?
So yeah, we actually have some great questions that we'll get to in a second. I'm trying to mentally organize them here because we have some great topics that some of the viewers
Sure.
want to cover. But so actually to get right into this, one of the things that whenever I'm doing any instructing, and one of the first things I tell people that you sort of alluded to already is the brakes. I don't care how much horsepower your car has, your brakes are still your most powerful speed changing device on your car.
Absolutely.
So you use them respectfully in that regard. So the thing that I think gets lost in my description though is more correctly, your brakes are actually also the most powerful sort of weight transfer device on your car as well. So with that in mind, let's John Gordos has a great question about brake application for front wheel drive versus rear wheel drive, which could be a whole other discussion in itself. But before we get too deep into that, just address that a little bit and some of the peculiarities about front wheel drive versus rear drive cars when it comes to what you can do with the brakes.
So I think this actually probably is going to be covered more in our next topic, where we're talking about trail braking in terms of technique. And that's where we do to potentially see some quite dramatic differences in technique and what we're wanting to do for front wheel drive versus rear wheel drive versus four wheel drive cars. And it's more about manipulating the handling balance and the balance of the car at turn in, particularly with front wheel drive cars. They do normally and naturally suffer from a tendency towards understeer. So some of what we do on the brake during turn in and the trail braking phase is all about getting the car to actually rotate into the corner and overcome that natural understeer. I wouldn't necessarily say that the straight line hard braking phase dramatically changes between front wheel drive, rear wheel drive and four wheel drive though. Just that part where we're actually trying to do our maximum braking in a straight line, that aspect for me, not a lot of difference in it. Obviously there's nuances here depending on the specifics of your car. And one thing I will just mention that I did overlook in the body I was just talking about there is that when we say fast and aggressive brake application, I mean, there are levels to this. We're not trying to treat the brake like a switch. It's not all or nothing. And there is also a natural pitch frequency that each car will have. Don't want to get too deep into that. It's a more complex topic that's outside of our scope today. But basically what I'm saying here is if you've got your stock road car that's softly sprung, that's going to pitch at a different rate to a stiffly sprung race car. And the stiffly sprung race car will accept a faster application of the brake pedal. So there's levels to this that we do need to understand. So John, I think there's going to be a little bit more of an answer to your question though, as I say, as we move into trail braking. So have we got another question there, JG?
Yeah, let me combine a few here. We've got some good questions from Chris and Peter, and actually two questions from Chris and a question from Peter regarding that sort of imminent lockup point. And I'll try and combine all what they're asking into a single topic here, but
yeah,
they're sort of asking about is that point where we're talking about we're getting a little bit of under rotation of the tire versus the road, is that what we refer to as threshold braking, and is that sort of what ABS is trying to emulate? And it, the quick answer is yes, it is, but some ABS systems are better at it than others, and some of them are more tuned to saving you from hitting a snowbank on the side of the road, versus a motorsports ABS system, which is trying to actually produce better lap time. So yeah, let's talk about sort of how to manage that point of incipient lockup, either through your foot and skill versus with an ABS system.
Okay, yeah, that in itself is a big topic. So let me just try and break that down. So first of all, I'll just quickly cover ABS because as you've said, JG, quite rightly, they aren't all created equal, and a lot of road car ABS is absolute garbage on a racetrack. And as a driver, we're actually probably better to purposely stay away from that ABS engagement because it seems to be overactive. And the reason for this is OE manufacturers, they're not trying to optimize lap times. Their ABS tuning is really around driver comfort. They don't want to upset the driver, and they want to maintain steering input. That's really the key for a factory ABS system. Motorsport ABS, on the other hand, as you mentioned, that is really focused on optimal performance, trying to get that slide under rotation, the optimal slip angle of the tire or slip percentage of the tire, and also is tunable. There's adjustability for the track, for the tire, wet versus dry. So in a nutshell, I'll just cover that and leave it there. As I've said, I could talk for another half an hour on ABS systems. The technique of actually braking though, so obviously this is going to depend whether your car has ABS or not. And again, it's a pretty big topic. What I'd suggest here is the key is really building up slowly. Obviously, and it should go without saying, obviously, if you overcook this, you could end up in the kiddie litter, and that's not really going to do much for your confidence, and it's certainly not going to aid your lap times. The technique really is about finding a suitable braking marker on the track and using that as a reference point. This could be a barrier change on the side of the track, it could be a change in the surface on the track, or basically anything that's always going to be there lap after lap. pro tip here, don't use a shadow. Those actually move during the day, surprisingly, but a lot of people use shadows as a braking marker. So then what we want to do, once we've got that braking marker, use that as a reference and start braking at or maybe just before that braking marker. And you're going to get a sense as you get closer to the corner of whether you've basically braked too early. And the key you'll notice there is as you get closer to the apex, you're going to end up getting off the brake prematurely because you've realized that you've overslowed the car. Quite often this will actually be followed by a second application of the brakes as you get closer to the apex. So that's a key thing to keep in mind. What are you actually doing on the brakes? And just understanding, thinking through what you've done. And there's some red flags in there. You can, of course, go too far. And one of the problems we see when we outbrake ourselves and brake too late is because we're still trying to slow the car down, we're still applying too much braking force as we get to the turn-in point. And as we'll find as we get into our next topic, there's only so much grip the tyres have available, so they can brake at maximum G-force, they can corner at maximum G-force, but they cannot combine maximum braking and cornering at the same time. So what this results in when we are starting to just outbrake ourselves is the car will tend to understeer at corner entry because we're still asking too much braking for the tyres at the front of the car to be able to turn in. So that's my quick answer there. As I've said, I could probably talk for another half an hour on that topic, but I think we'll probably move on from there. Again, we're going to cover some more of these questions at a little bit later on in the webinar. So I think if we're okay, we'll move on from there, JG.
Yeah. There was a couple things I want to sneak in there. We'll do that
absolutely.
later. But yeah, thanks to everybody. And again, if you have questions, throw them in the chat, and they'll get to us, and we'll try and get to everybody, or at least get to everybody's topic that they bring up. And also, I just want to mention that HP Academy does a great job at not only doing these live webinars, but they are a fantastic resource to go to for not just driving stuff, but like everything from driving techniques to data acquisition to how to wire your race car, how to do an alignment properly, and not just how-to stuff, but deep into the theory behind some of the stuff. It's actually a resource that I use quite a bit when I'm sitting down to write a story. They're one of the first places that I will go to kind of get myself into the right mindset when it comes to researching some of these tech topics. So they're a great source that we use too. And if you're looking, I don't know if you guys are looking for a testimonial from me, but you absolutely
sounds like we've got one.
We have one, yeah.
Perfect. I appreciate the feedback there, JG. All right, let's crack back on. So we've still got another couple of little topics that I want to talk about while we're on this braking. So let's just jump back into my laptop here, and we'll just talk about the differences here in braking for a conventional car that's maybe got little to no aero on it. So let's have a look at this brake trace we've got here, and we've got our brake pressure percentage. So what you can see, and there's the white line there sort of demonstrating this, is that the brake pressure is relatively consistent through the braking zone. It does taper off right at the end. This is our trail braking, which again we'll talk about separately. But basically there's no real downforce here on the car. So the amount of brake pressure that we use to stay on that point of lockup, that threshold of lockup, can be pretty consistent. So it's quite easy once we find it to maintain it. However, if you do have the benefit of being able to drive a car with high downforce, this is quite different. Obviously, the downforce that the aero produces is an aspect of the speed that the car's going. So what this means is that we've got a lot more potential grip available from the tyres to slow the car down when we're doing, let's say, 140 mile an hour, compared to when we get down to maybe corner entry where we might be doing 30 to 50 mile an hour. So this is where we see this more tapered approach, where initially we've got a very high level of initial brake pressure where there's a lot of grip available, a lot of downforce. The downforce might be producing maybe 1,000, maybe 1,500 pounds of downforce. So that's forcing the car into the ground, and that really helps our tires grip. But of course, as that downforce washes away, we need to reduce our brake pressure because otherwise we're going to end up locking up. So this is an aspect that probably at Grassroots or enthusiasts, we're probably not driving cars with massive amounts of downforce, but even the modifications we've made to our own Toyota 86, we've got a top stage composites diffuser, splitter and rear wing, and we've calculated that to be producing somewhere around about 600 kilograms of downforce at 200 kilometers an hour. So some of this element does come in. It's just important to understand that concept, because otherwise you're either not exploiting the amount of grip available at high speed, or alternatively you're going to blow through and end up locking the wheels as the speed bleeds off. The other aspect that is part of this is our braking technique for different parts of the racetrack. So there's not a lot of black and white when it comes to race driving, and we can't just go out and say that every time we touch the brakes we want to be at maximum braking force and get there as quickly as possible. That is exactly what we do want to do for a large braking zone, maybe from maximum speed, maybe the fastest part of the racetrack where we're coming into a low speed corner. We want to slow the car up as quickly as possible. That's what we would want to do. And if we jump across to my laptop, that's the sort of trace we can see with this gray trace here. So we've got that fast build up to maximum braking force, and we can see the amount of braking force versus our red trace. So that's perfect for one of these big braking zones. But conversely, if we are just wanting to bleed off a little bit of speed and we're already at high speed, we'll have a different technique, which is this red line that we can see in here. And you can see there, we're not using anywhere near the amount of pressure, and we're also not as quick to build up our brake pressure. So the reason for this is there might be a high speed part of the track which leads into a relatively high speed corner where we need to brush off a little bit of speed, but not a massive amount. This technique that I've just shown you there, this is often referred to as brushing the brake pedal. If we were aggressive with our brake application under these conditions, the weight transfer or load transfer would really tend to upset the car. So a smooth application of our brakes, less outright brake pressure, it doesn't upset the car, it keeps everything balanced. So just important to understand that we need to adapt our technique based on the type of corner and where we are on the track. Lastly as well, I just want to talk about heel and toe downshifting. This is another area where we see a lot of enthusiasts go wrong when it comes to our brake application. I'll assume everyone's got an idea of heel and toe and what that is, but essentially in a manual transmission, it's the matching of RPM for the lower gear by blipping the throttle while we're on the brake. So we've got our right foot, the ball of the foot will be on the brake pedal, and then we're blipping the throttle with the heel. And this takes a little bit to get right. And what we will often see when we're not comfortable and familiar with that technique is exactly what we've got here. So we can see these big troughs in the brake pressure trace, and these coincide with the throttle blips that we can see up here. So trying to make sure that you're optimizing your brake pressure application during those zones so that you are not coming right off the brake pedal and seeing those big dips in pressure like that. Just understanding that that's something that you will be doing naturally to start with and focusing on it, that's usually enough to kick that habit or at least reduce it dramatically. Also important to mention here, we can't expect perfection. I've seen brake traces from professional race drivers. Naturally, there is always a little bit of a dip in the brake pressure anyway, but nothing as dramatic as what we can see there. All right, we're going a little bit long on this topic, so the next one we're going to move into is the release of the brake pedal, trail braking. But before we do that, just a bit of a sum up there with you, JG. We'll bring you back in. Anything you want to add to the topic now that we've sort of completed that?
Yeah, so I think the only this actually segues nicely into a couple questions that we didn't quite get to the first round, but let's expand just a little bit on that initial application, because so one thing I noticed in the first traces we showed there, and somebody else caught this as well, is that even our pro driver trace had a little bit of an adjustment there on the ramp up. And normally what I would like to see, as an instructor, critiquing somebody's braking technique would be one nice steady up ramp for that brake application. So the question coming off of this is, how do we fine tune the speed of our brake application for the corner we're approaching? And obviously it's going to be a different application for every corner almost, but how do we know when we should be more aggressive on that application, or less aggressive on that application? And is it just a matter of how much weight we want to transfer, how quickly?
So I think a lot of it comes down to what we are coming up to, and it alludes back to what I was talking about there. If you are looking, every track's going to have perhaps 1, 2, or maybe 3 what I call maximum braking zones, and these are normally from a relatively high speed section of the racetrack, and we'll be approaching either a slow or a medium speed corner, often into a hairpin. With that sort of corner, or that sort of sector of the track, our focus there is trying to reduce the speed of the car as quickly as possible. And that is the sort of area where we would use an aggressive brake application. We want to get that brake pressure built up as quickly as possible. We are braking in a straight line, and we're not going to be turning in until we've bled off a significant amount of speed. The other sort of brake application, and there are levels to this, obviously there's in-betweens as well, is that sort of area where we're probably at a medium to high speed leading into a relatively high speed corner, where we're only trying to adjust our speed maybe by 10 to 20%. Now, the two aspects there is, first of all, we don't need to drop as much speed. And the other one that sort of feeds into this just as importantly though is that we don't want to upset the balance of the car. And that's where a big brake application is going to have a big load transfer towards the front of the car. It's going to unweight the rear of the car. And particularly at high speed, if you're turning into a corner, that's the sort of situation which is very likely to result in you ending up in a spin. So it's just understanding the effect that the brake application is going to have on our weight transfer, which we're going to jump into very, very shortly. And obviously, like anything, there's no black and white here. It is a case of actually testing to find, for a given particular sector of your own racetrack, what is going to work best. And we do cover this in more detail in our race driving fundamentals course. Obviously here, we're looking at a high level overview and trying to fit a lot into a 45-minute webinar.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
And there's 2 more here that
Yep.
I'll take real quick, because Chris has asked some great questions tonight. He wants to know about braking technique changing with a change in pad compound, and the easy answer there is, if you think about your deceleration not in terms of brake pressure, but in terms of maybe your speed trace on that data acquisition trace, you have an ideal speed trace for entering a corner. You just adjust your brake pressure to match that ideal speed trace. So more aggressive pads might mean less physical brake pressure, but don't forget that less pressure may also mean a little bit different bias in those brakes. So tune your technique to the speed trace with different pads, and then tune your body to the pressure required to hit that ideal speed trace. And Garrett wants to know about practicing heel toe. Yeah, worldwide, one of the most difficult things that people find in learning how to drive fast is just finding the opportunities to do it. It's easier than ever to get track time almost everywhere in the world, but it's still not the easiest thing in the world to do. So you just really need to find your opportunities, and what you might need to do is dedicate one of your track weekends to saying, okay, I am working on specific techniques this weekend. I'm not going to worry about my apexes as much, or my track out as much. I'm just going to focus on getting my downshifts correct this weekend, and that's going to be the thing I work on this weekend, and just sort of
Yeah.
intensively study those things.
I'll just talk to that for a moment. So
Yeah.
we've got a section where we do cover in our course the details on heel and toe, and there's a couple of things I'll mention. So first of all, doing this in your road car, obviously I'm not advocating here speeding on the road, but doing it in your road car will help to a degree. It builds up some of that muscle memory, but quite often what we then find is when we try and translate what we've learned on the road to the racetrack, it doesn't work quite as well. And the reason for this is that the braking effort that we're putting into our road car, if we're driving at road car speeds, we're not slowing the car down anywhere near as quickly. So we're not as aggressive on the brake pedal, and we've got more time to physically match revs. So learning in your road car, helpful to a point, but then as you mentioned, you actually have to get out there and do it on the racetrack. And the problem I know with a lot of enthusiasts is that learning that technique and practicing it, you're going to probably end up going slower before you go faster. So it's just having that patience, and probably put your lap timer away, forget about your lap times as you've mentioned, JG, and just focus on the technique and perfecting it, because I can guarantee you ultimately it is going to make you faster. It can just be a frustrating learning curve. The other thing I'll just quickly touch on is that brake compound. We've been through this ourselves, and there are a range of different compounds and different aggressiveness, and we ended up with a pad in one of our own cars that would have been completely undrivable in a car without ABS. It was designed for a high downforce car, a heavy car, neither of which we had at the time, and basically the brake pedal just about became like a switch. As soon as you touch the brake pedal, your head just about hit the windscreen, and it was maximum retardation, and the ABS was all over the show. So choosing a correct compound can make a really big difference in matching it to the type of car that you are driving. All right, we're going to end up going a little bit long here, JG, so I'm just going to jump into our second topic here, if that's okay, which is our trail braking, or our brake release. Now, again, this is an area that is pretty overlooked by most enthusiasts, because it's not a technique that we use when we're driving out on the road. When we're driving on the road, the usual technique is brake in a straight line and then get completely off the brake and then turn into your corner, and that's absolutely fine and nice and safe on the road. When we apply that same technique to braking on the racetrack though, we are giving away a huge amount of potential time. And also, as we'll find, it doesn't give us the benefit of being able to manipulate the handling balance of the car. So there's two aspects that go hand in hand with trail braking. So first of all, what am I talking about when I use that term trail braking? It's simply how we release the brake pedal as we begin to turn into the corner. So we're not treating the brake pedal like a switch where we're on the brakes, braking, and then off. We're actually building up quickly and aggressively, holding our brake pressure, and then gradually tapering that away. And we just need a bit of a background understanding of what's actually going on in terms of grip from the car as we do this. So let's head across to my laptop screen. To make things really easy, what we've got here is an overhead view of one of our Toyota 86s, and you can see we've got this number here, 25, on each corner of the car. So what we're doing is making it really simple. Let's assume that overall the car has 100 units of what I'm going to call grip. Doesn't really matter the physics behind this. Let's just assume that overall we've got 100 units of grip. Now, let's look at what happens when we brake hard. So here we've got our lateral and longitudinal G-force. So we can see our G-force has gone right forward. So we're heavy braking there. And what we can see is our units of grip on the front, we've increased to 33. The magnitude doesn't matter, just try and understand the concept. At the same time, at the back of the car, it's reduced to 15. Now this is because the way the tyres work, and we'll have a look at this in a second, essentially what we gain on the more heavily loaded end of the car, the front of the car where all the weight has been transferred forward to, the amount of grip we gain there is less than what we lose at the rear of the car. So if we look at this quick calculation, we had 100 units, you'll remember, when the car was static. Now we've only got 96, so we've actually lost a little bit of overall grip. So that's what's happening under brakes. Let's have a look at when we turn this time to a left-hand corner. So we can see our lateral G-force, we've gone across to the right. So of course what that's done is it's more heavily loaded the right-hand side of the car. Again, for real simple numbers, we've kept them the same, and we get the same situation here. We've only got 96 units of grip, so we've actually lost a little bit. So this is something that is so easy to overlook. Anytime we're turning the car, braking or accelerating, we want to minimize the weight transfer as far as possible, because that's going to give us the maximum amount of grip. And why that works like this is because we need to understand what's happening with our tires. So just let me explain this little graph I've got here. On the horizontal axis, we've got the vertical load. So the amount of vertical load on the tires. So of course, when we brake, we get more vertical load on the front tires, less on the rear. We've got in green our coefficient of friction. So that's the amount of friction between the tires and the road surface. And then sort of a combination of this is our lateral force. The amount of force that the tires can generate is shown here. We're talking lateral, but longitudinal, the same thing. So let's just quickly have a look here. Let's say we start with 2,000 newtons of load on the front wheels. We get on the brakes and we increase that to 4,000 newtons. So the important thing, and that's really represented by our last little graphics, our last little slides, is that when we double the vertical load on the tires, we don't double the amount of grip available. We don't double the amount of force, longitudinal force that the tires can generate. And that's because our coefficient of friction actually drops away as the vertical load increases. Okay, so that's the first concept we need to understand. Anytime we've got weight transfer in the car, we're actually reducing the overall amount of grip. The next thing we need to understand is this concept called the traction circle. And you'll probably hear this talked about a fair bit. And all it is a XY graph here where we've got lateral G-force on our horizontal axis, left and right hand, and then we've got longitudinal G-force, acceleration and braking on our vertical axis. So this gives us a combined indication of what the grip of the car is, what's actually happening. And what we can see here is that, let's say for this particular car, we can get this amount of maximum braking force. Also, we can get this amount of lateral cornering force. Doesn't really matter what the specific numbers are, but you can see that we can generate that amount of grip. The problem is that the tires only have so much grip available. So while we can generate maximum braking force or maximum cornering force, we cannot do both together. So if we want to start out braking and then move into a right-hand corner, in order to free up some available grip from the front tires to allow the car to start turning, what we actually have to do is reduce our braking force slightly. And then what we can do is we can come out here and we can generate some cornering force. Ultimately, what that allows us to do is kind of ride around this rim of the traction circle, and the more of that area that we can use, the better. Let's take that road car example I gave where we do all of our braking in a straight line. So basically that allows us to use this area of our traction circle, and then once we've got off the brakes, then we're going to turn into the corner. So that allows us to use this area. Obviously what that means, oops, no, don't want that. Well, obviously what that means is that we're not exploiting the amount of grip available when we get to the turn-in point of the corner. So this is where trail braking comes in, and our first point here is just about maximizing the lap times, or minimizing our lap times I should say, by exploiting all of that available grip. Essentially what we want to do is as we get to our corner turn-in, we want to gradually bleed off the brake pedal as we are simultaneously adding our steering lock. And that should be quite a natural feeling once we understand what's going on. You could almost think of it like a piece of string attached between your brake pedal and your steering wheel. And as we reduce the brake pressure, that allows us to use more and more of our steering lock. What that looks like here, we've got our brake pressure plot, and we've got our steering angle below. So you can see that there is actually an overlap here. We've got our maximum braking pressure point here, and as we get to this point here, we're starting to bleed off that brake pressure at about the same rate we're starting to add steering lock. And basically during the trail braking area, we're going to be completely off the brake just as we're sort of starting to come up towards the apex. On the right hand side, we've got a bit of a line showing what that actually looks like with steering angle on the x-axis and our brake pressure on the vertical axis. So it's all about optimizing the performance of the car and the speed of the car at turn-in. Now, that's all well and good, but the other aspect here that plays into this is optimizing our handling balance. So optimizing how the car is actually handling. So let's say we've got a car that suffers from oversteer at turn-in, corner entry. So what that generally means is that we don't have enough grip at the rear of the car. So we can manipulate our brake input during the trail braking phase to account for that. If we get off the brakes a little bit earlier with our trail braking, what that's going to do is transfer load towards the rear tyres, giving more grip at the rear tyres and reducing the tendency for the car to oversteer. So this is where some of those subtleties around the technique of trail braking and corner entry for a front wheel drive versus a rear wheel drive versus four wheel drive do come into play. On the other hand, if we've got a car that is tending to understeer, by trail braking, what that's going to do is twofold. First of all, it's adding more load to our front tyres, giving us more grip. Secondly, it's also reducing the grip from the rear of the car, which will tend to reduce the amount of traction available there, and that can help the car rotate into the corner. So it's a really important technique to understand, not just from purely a lap time perspective, but also from being able to subtly change that handling balance. And even during a race, if we've got a fuel load that's burning off, by adjusting that handling balance using our trail braking technique, that can also get the most out of the car. All right, I've talked a lot there, JG. I'm sure you've got a bit to add to this, so we'll bring you back in. What's your thoughts there?
Yeah. So we have some dynamite questions to get to here. No, there's a lot of great information there, and I want to start with Max's question here. A lot of the stuff we're seeing tonight is sort of dependent on having good data acquisition in the car, and Max is asking about what's a good data acquisition system to use, how hard is it to install, and one of the best answers to that I can give right now is that it has never been a better time to go shopping for data acquisition systems, because they are
Absolutely
more plentiful and more available than ever before. And for me, I think the minimum that I need from a data system is if I have a speed trace and a G circle, I can set up a car. I can improve my driving. I can do a lot from there. So even something like an Apex Pro, even some of the phone based acquisition systems like Harry's Lap Timer are fantastic. What do you guys like? Like how do you walk somebody through the process
Yep.
of picking a data acquisition system?
Okay, so again, I could talk for an hour on this. We actually we've got two data analysis courses because this is such an important way of improving your lap times. However, I know one of the things that puts a lot of people off is the cost. And honestly, these systems can be as cheap or as expensive as you want them to be. The other thing I would say is so important, particularly when you're starting out, when it comes to data, less is actually more. And I know that might sound counterintuitive, but the more data we've got to look through, the easier it is to get lost in that data. And I'd 100% agree with you. If you've just got a lateral longitudinal G-force plot and you've got a corrected speed trace, that's a huge amount of data to get started with, and you're not going to get confused. At the entry level, as you mentioned, Harry's Lap Timer. The other one, we've actually got a worked example in our data analysis course using a phone-based app from HP Tuners, which is Track Addict. Very, very powerful tools for not a lot of money. And let's be honest, everyone's got a phone these days, so that's going to give you video as well, so really powerful. The next step up the rung that we really like is the AIM Solo 2 or AIM Solo 2 DL. I forget the specifics, but I think around $400 US is going to get you one of those. Really, really powerful, and they're also portable, so you can share one with a buddy and cut down on the costs. The examples that I've given you there in the webinar so far are from a more high-end system. This is a Motec system, and you don't need to be spending Motec money. And also the other important thing to understand, regardless whether you're using a phone-based app or Motec or Pi Research or any of the high-end brands from Bosch, the techniques of actually analyzing the data are exactly the same. So yeah, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit there that doesn't end up needing to cost you the earth. All right, we've probably got time for one more question there if you've got one, JG, and otherwise we'll crack on because we are just going to run a little bit long otherwise.
Yeah. Okay. So let's, if that's the case, let's go with this question from Roger, and he says there's no single answer for every part of a track, but is trail braking always used on every type of corner? or is trail braking only useful in certain types of corners? And you know what, I'm going to let you take this one from the beginning, because I have thoughts on this, but my as a longtime autocrosser, my thoughts may not match with what message you want to put out there, Andre. So,
I, all right. I'm also interested to hear your view on it. And again, just
yeah.
remembering, I am not a driving instructor here. I've been learning from our own courses, from our pro driver. So I think Roger's probably nailed it in so much as there is no single answer. A lot of it is going to depend on the track, and a lot of it is also going to depend on your car and the imbalances that your car may have, or tendency towards understeer or tendency towards oversteer, and whether you need to get rid of those tendencies or modify those tendencies. You mentioned autocross there as well, Roger. Sorry, JG, not Roger, which is a form of motorsport that I have not been involved with, but usually I think it'd probably be safe to say typically a bit lower speed than road race applications out on a dedicated full-time race circuit. So here's what I'd probably say is that we're more likely to use trail braking pretty significantly in some of those higher braking zones where we're going from high speed down to low speed and turning into a corner, maybe a tight corner. And that's also an area where we're probably going to have the most trouble maybe rotating a car into the corner, and that's where trail braking can come in and be helpful. My other example, which is kind of about the same with the braking application, where a high-speed corner where we're only trying to brush off a little bit of speed, that would probably be an area where we'd be less likely to use trail braking so significantly. How's that sort of match with your thoughts on the topic, JG?
Yeah, I tend to agree. I would say, you know, as your skills increase, the time you spend on the outer circumference of that friction circle is also going to increase. And the real answer is, in the middle of that friction circle there are no trophies in the middle of that friction circle. So the more time you spend on the perimeter, the more time you're going to spend on the podium.
Yeah, I agree.
So yeah, always if you're in a position where you're only doing one thing, then you better be in the middle of a straightaway. Otherwise, always try and use every bit of what that tire has to give to you. So, but yeah, great questions from everybody. So I'll go in the chat and address a couple of these too, because some of them are worth talking about while you cover this next part, which is also very, very, very good.
I will mention we're still going to have a dedicated Q&A session on wider topics very, very shortly. We're just about ready to wrap up, and I will just cut this a little bit short because we are running a little long. So I've got one more topic because I think this is really important, and another area that the average novice is really overlooking, which is driver vision, or where we are looking on the racetrack. So we'll just jump across to my laptop and I'll just show you this. This is actually from a module in the Driving Fundamentals course, and this is our pro driver actually showing on our local track whereabouts we should be looking. So I'm just going to play this, if I can play this. Let's see if we can. There we go. So that's awkward, isn't it? Let's just come back here and we'll see if we can do this full screen. Maybe we can, maybe we can't. No, my bar is blocking it. That's all right. Let's just play this inside here. So we're coming up here, and the first thing we're looking at, or the first mistake I should say that most novices are doing, is they're looking way too close to the front of the car. And this is particularly a problem when we are at high speed. This point that we're coming up to here is about 120 mile an hour, 200 kilometers an hour. And we find most drivers are really focused quite narrowly just at what's happening just off the end of the car in front of them. And that's a big problem. What we want to do is always focus on getting our vision out further up the racetrack. And this is important because it gives us a wider understanding of what's happening. We'll feel less rushed, and we can also make necessary adjustments quicker. We're not going to be surprised. So while it's a little bit hard to see here, what we're actually looking at here, Andrew, our pro driver, is already focused his attention on an orange marker that we're going to be coming up to. This is the turn-in point for this first corner. So let's get a little bit closer. So So that's that marker there. That Andrew's just passing now. So we always want to be one phase ahead of what we're doing. So now that we're basically coming up to that turn-in marker, we're already taking our attention off, and while it's a little bit tricky to see just now, we're coming up to a chicane or a right-left complex called the bus stop. So we're already looking at that next zone, which we'll just come up to here. And we've got two curbs that we're going to run over. And so we're already lined up for this right-hand curb. So Andrew's already got his vision up the road further to this next curb, the next point that we're going to be cutting across. And each time when we get to that point, you can see that that vision point has moved. So we're now looking at the exit curb here of the bus stop. We'll get through this. And once we're there, our next curb, the apex that we're going to be hitting. And now Andrew is looking as far around this corner here called the Southern Loop as he possibly can. Basically trying to spot the exit. It's probably a little bit inaccurate here, probably actually more up here towards the corner exit at this point. And always just keeping that vision one zone or one phase ahead of what we're doing at the particular point in time. This is really simple in terms of a concept, but it is really, really easy to forget, really easy to overlook. And particularly when things are going wrong, it's very easy to find that you've actually pulled your vision back. So one of the things to always keep in your mind if you are having a problem with a particular corner, maybe you're not able to hit your apex, maybe you're missing your brake marker, maybe you're running wide on your corner exit, always think to yourself, where am I looking through that corner? And make sure that you're always focused ahead. It's a really easy way to completely run wide and miss an apex if you're simply not looking at the apex. There's something I always like to keep in my head is that the car will end up going where we're looking, which is why when things go wrong and you end up in a spin, looking at the tree that you don't want to hit is a pretty surefire way of ending up hitting that tree or the barrier or whatever it is that you don't want to hit. So always look where you want the car to go and always try and keep your vision one phase up the road. All right, JG, we'll give you get you back in here again, and any thoughts on that? What do you see in your terms of race driver instruction in terms of where your students are looking?
Yeah, so it's interesting because sort of straddling the worlds of autocross and track events, we see a lot of folks that have really good habits that they have to adjust to different situations. Autocrossers are naturally very good at looking ahead, but because of the density of control inputs in an autocross or a slalom situation, you're doing something every half a second versus on a road course you're doing something every 2 or 3 seconds. So while autocrossers are really, really good at looking ahead, sometimes they're not looking far enough ahead on a road course. The thing that you realize when you get to a more open road course is while you're going much faster, things happen much slower, but they happen for a longer period of time. You're in a corner for several seconds, and once you're in a corner somewhere, there's very little you can do about what's actually happening at that very moment. So you really need to concentrate, further ahead based on whatever speed you're doing. And another thing that I see quite a bit is people that are very good at looking ahead the proper amount, but will then fixate on that target as it gets closer to them. So they'll approach a corner, they'll find their exit, right at turn-in and look at the exact right place, but then they'll watch that exit all the way by and forget to reset that gap for how far they're looking ahead. So yeah. Remember that looking ahead is a thing that needs to sort of constantly update as you're moving through a circuit.
Yeah, I'll just also mention something I overlooked to state there is it's not just about getting your braking points, your apexes and your corner exits spot on. When you're racing in traffic as well, keeping your vision further down the track, you can get a sense of what's happening with the cars up ahead of you. And that's not just always about lining up an opportunity for a pass. If something goes wrong, someone gets tangled up in an incident ahead of you, being able to see that and understand how it's unfolding, that's going to give give you more of an opportunity to make a decision as to how to get out of the way, maybe how to capitalize on someone else's mistake, and hopefully also keep your car in one piece. Whereas if you're looking just off the end of the bonnet, the end of the hood of the car, that's much more difficult to do, and it can easily result in an avoidable accident. Right, I think what we'll do here, again, I'm conscious of our time and appreciate everyone watching probably has other things to do. So I think we'll wrap up the body of our webinar here. Don't go away though, as I mentioned, we do have more questions coming. I've already seen we've got a bunch of really great ones that have come through, and we haven't been able to do justice to all of them yet. So don't worry, we're not going to miss those questions. And if you do have any questions, even if it's just on a broader aspect of race driving, we'd be happy to field those. So we'll get into those in a few moments. Now, before we do that, I just do really briefly want to cover off the fact I said at the start of the lesson, for those who have enjoyed what you've learned so far and maybe want to take your knowledge to the next level, we have put together a very special webinar only package deal. It's going to be perfect for anyone who is an enthusiast race driver, and I just want to quickly cover that off. So we'll just jump across to my laptop screen here for a moment, and we've actually got 3 packages that are on offer, and I'll just cover them each briefly. We'll start with the center one, which is our track day starter package. And this is our most popular package. For those thirsty for knowledge and really want to improve your lap times, this is probably the best option for you. So we've got a bunch of courses we're including in this, and we start with our race driving fundamentals course. And essentially, this is an expanded version of the webinar we've gone through today. You've seen some content from inside of the course that I've used for our slides and our props, but basically we give you all of the knowledge distilled from a professional race driver. And if you can't improve your lap times by seconds, I would be incredibly surprised. Now, it's not all about driving though. There's other aspects that you can use to improve your performance. We are including our motorsport wheel alignment course, which is valued at $129 as part of this package. And the ability to adjust your wheel alignment, particularly at the racetrack without breaking the bank, is really important. Maybe you get to the track with a dry setup and it starts raining. Maybe you find that your car might benefit from a little bit more negative camber on the right front corner for a particular racetrack. This course will teach you how to make those changes using string alignment equipment that is not going to break the bank. A little bit more advanced, but segueing out of our motorsport wheel alignment, is our practical corner weighting course. And this is something you'll see every professional race team doing to their car, often several times during a race weekend. Most enthusiasts completely overlook it. Adjusting the corner weight and will have a massive effect on the balance of the car, and also that sort of adds into the driver confidence. So we'll teach you what corner weighting is, how the corner weights affect the performance of the car, and then give you a step-by-step process along with worked examples so you can see that being done. We've then got our data analysis fundamentals course, which is valued at $129. Obviously, you've seen data as we've gone through today's webinar, and I cannot speak highly enough for data in terms of understanding what you are doing and what the car is doing out on the track. It makes it very obvious to see where you're giving away time, and a simple data system can pay for itself tenfold just with the improvements that you can see in your lap time. This course will teach you what data systems are, how to configure them, how to choose one, what sensors you will need, and then how to analyze that data. We've also got a simple step-by-step process that you can apply to your own driving. We know that once you've actually got stuck in and started improving your driving or your car, you're going to have questions that crop up, and we are here to help. That's why this package also includes 48 months of access to our members only forum, perfect place to ask your specific driving questions, as well as our weekly members webinars where we cover a wide range of topics including driving, race car optimization, engine tuning, and engine building, just to name a few, alone valued at $912. So that starter package there, total value of $1,368. For the next 3 days, just to say thanks for coming along and watching this lesson, we're making it available for just $397. This is probably the cheapest way to gain lap time in your car. We still understand though, it's a chunk of cash to come up within one hit, and we want to be able to help you improve your performance. So we are also offering a payment plan option. You can break that up into 8 weekly payments of just $49 a week. We also understand when it comes to purchasing online education like this, it can be a little bit daunting. Obviously, you don't know exactly what you're getting, and we want you to be able to purchase with complete confidence and zero risk, which is why we also offer a 60-day, no questions asked money back guarantee. There is zero risk in giving these courses a test drive. Right, so that's our first package there. As I've said, suitable to the majority of you probably who are watching, but we've got 2 other packages. On the right-hand side, we've got our VIP package, and this is going to be perfect for those of you who really have a massive thirst for automotive performance knowledge. This package will give you access to every single course that High Performance Academy currently offers. Not just race driver education and car setup, engine building, engine tuning, wiring, and we've got a bunch of other topics coming up. You'll also get free access to every course we ever produce in the future. You'll never pay for another course. You'll also get lifetime access to our webinars and our forum, and we're going to chuck in a free t-shirt and a sticker pack as well. Total value on that package is over $8,000. One-time payment of $1,997. Again, we've got payment plan options because we know that is a fairly large chunk of cash to come up with. Amazing value for money. Our last package on the left-hand side, if you want to wet your feet with this, but you don't quite have enough for either of those other 2 packages, you can purchase our Race Driving Fundamentals course on its own. I've already gone over what's included, so I won't cover it again. And that course is $99, or you can break that up with 8 weekly payments of $12. So really cost-effective way to get started. The starter package though, as I mentioned, is only available for the next 3 days. So if you want to purchase, you will have to move quickly. If you're watching on our website, you'll see a yellow claim your package button at the top of the chat. If you're watching on YouTube, the team will drop a link into the chat that you can follow. All right, I do appreciate everyone's patience. I just needed to show you that package that we've got. I know it is amazing value for money, and like I've said, this is going to be one of the most cost-effective ways of slashing your lap times. And remember, if you don't like them for any reason, there's zero risk. We've got that 60-day money-back guarantee as well. All right, for now though, we're going to jump into our questions and answers. I'll just mention as an added bonus for that starter package, for the first 10 people that purchase, we do have an HPA t-shirt, just like the one I'm wearing here, and an HPA sticker pack up for grabs. Only 10 of those available, so you will have to move quickly. And regardless where you're watching, we will ship that free of charge to your door. All right, I think we'll get into these questions now. JG, what have we got? We'll go through these together. I think you're a mine of information as well, so let's leverage off your experience as well.
No, yeah, we have a lot of great questions here, and I'll just add one thing about the HPA packages. One of my favorite things about them that Andre didn't really cover is, yeah, you have access to all this stuff live when it happens, but all of these webinars that they do are also archived, and they're not only archived, but they're annotated. So where if you don't want to sit through 2 hours of Andre talking about alignments, you just want to see what does toe affect my car, that's tagged in there. You can go right to it, and it's a fantastic place to like just start researching something. And they do a great job at organizing it. Honestly, I am jealous because I wish we would have had this idea first, but you guys are doing a great job with it, and thank you for sharing it with us so we can still leverage it. Okay, a ton of great questions here. I want to go back to one earlier that's actually been getting a little bit of traction in the chat, and that was about gear skipping during downshifts. I am a committed gear skipper. Most of the cars that I've ever raced are all synchro transmissions. Even if you're going from like say 5th to 3rd or 5th to 2nd, that's happening so quickly that by the time you go 5-4, 4-3, 3-2, you don't. That's happening over the course of a couple seconds. If your transmission can handle it and your timing can handle it, I see no issues with gear skipping. What about you, Andre? I mean, your 86 there is probably a synchro trans. So What's your approach, or is it a doggy
For
box
our
there?
grassroots 86 has a Hollinger paddle shifted sequential in it. So yeah, maybe not
Oh,
that grassroots in that respect. So, however, we've developed that car from the point that it did have an H pattern gearbox in it, which was synchro mesh. So yeah, absolutely. My technique actually was there's a very fast section of our local racetrack. We're doing about 190 kilometers an hour on the run up to that section, and we're basically in sixth gear with our H pattern, and then we're coming out into a hairpin where we're exiting that hairpin in second. So absolutely, I totally agree with the gear skipping. Because otherwise we're rowing the car down sixth, down to fifth, down to fourth, third, and then finally into second. Now, segueing back into the body of the webinar where we looked at that data trace from the heel and toe, and we know that even with a professional race driver, we're going to see some level of reduction in our brake pressure during a heel and toe application. So if we're going sixth, fifth, fourth, third, second, we've got each of those shifts where we're heel and toeing, blipping the throttle, a reduction in our brake pressure, it's going to affect our braking performance. Whereas if we go from sixth down to second in one shot, maybe we do it in two separate shifts, but we're skipping a few gears in there, it's going to allow us to concentrate on modulating that brake pressure much better. Obviously with a proper sequential gearbox, be it paddle shift or lever actuated, we're forced to go down through the gears. But yeah, where possible, particularly for those big braking zones from high gear right down into first or second, then yeah, I think skipping gears is totally acceptable.
yeah. Every time you do something in a race car is an opportunity to do something wrong. So the
Yeah.
fewer things, the fewer things you can do, the better. A little bit off topic here, but I'm actually curious to hear your answer. Gabriel wants to know, how does one get into professional motorsports? The easy answer, Gabriel, is to be very rich, and
Very rich.
you're that that's it. That's all it takes. So
Yeah.
I mean, I know how things work here in the U.S., where the actual term professional motorsports is kind of a misnomer, because racing at all levels is essentially club racing. Just some of it happens to be on TV. Most of the people doing it are paying to be there. Maybe a few of them are getting paid, but by and large, even at the highest levels of sports car racing in the U.S., most of the people are funding that effort on their own. What are things like in New Zealand? Is it similar? I mean, is even pro racing essentially glorified club racing down there?
Look, I think there's two things I'll say about that. First of all, the best way to make a small fortune in motorsport is to start with a big fortune. 99.9% of people in motorsport around the world are paying for their drives. So it is very difficult, almost irrespective of your level of talent, to actually make it as a professional driver where you're getting paid enough to have a good living. So even a lot of the professional drivers we see are probably working on a shoestring budget where their sponsors are paying for their drive and they probably don't have a lot left over. So that's important to understand. And these days, unfortunately, as motorsport has become more and more expensive, the days of just outright sheer talent being enough to get you a seat, unfortunately, those are often long gone, and you only need to look at F1 where, without offending anyone, Nikita Mazepin, for example, pretty much there's no argument that his drive is a paid for drive, and that is why he is with Haas. So to come back, here in New Zealand, there really is no professional level of motorsport. Pretty much there's no paid drives. So we're a very small country, 5 million people, and that's pretty much why. We've also got no manufacturing base, so there's no big sponsorship dollars here in New Zealand. That being said, I think as a country, New Zealand's punched well above its weight. We've got a couple of top drivers who have made it into the Australian Supercars series. Shane Van Gisbergen is one. Scott McLaughlin, who has now made his rookie debut in IndyCar in the US, and he has won Rookie of the Year. I think the path to professional motorsport is almost always the same though, and karting has always been the feeder to professional racing, or almost always. There's a few exceptions, but karting's probably the place to get started. But Unfortunately, yeah, as I've said, talent will get you so far, and beyond that, you need a big checkbook or potentially parents with a pretty large checkbook.
Yeah, and I don't mean to be discouraging to anybody. The
No,
good news on the flip side of that is club racing and even just access to racetracks with your street car has never ever been more accessible everywhere in the world than it is right now. This is
yeah,
a golden age of track access. So even if you're just taking your street car and slowly modifying it to be more capable on track, you can,
yeah.
almost no matter where you are in the world, you have access to a track fairly affordably and fairly regularly. Um, let's move on. Okay. Here's a great question from Lucas, and I would love to talk to you about this a little bit. Lucas says he's been away from racing for about a year and a half. Plans to get back in the next month or so. What exercises would you suggest someone rusty should do to get back up to speed? And I would say, aside from just normally being in good health, the first thing I would tell somebody is go sim racing. How about you,
Yeah,
Andre?
yeah, sim racing was something that I had as a topic that we were going to talk about, but as we've discussed, we went a little bit long, so I didn't really dive into it. But yeah, sim racing, I believe, is a really viable way of improving your racing. And I mean, it's evolved so much in the last decade, and particularly over the last couple of years with COVID. We've seen a lot of people obviously can't go racing, so they've jumped on the sim. And we've got our own sim at the workshop, and I've used it extensively, particularly for two reasons. One has been learning tracks that I haven't been to before. The endurance series that I'm involved with, that involves 3 racetracks that initially I'd never driven at before. And before going to the first round at Tiratonga Park, which is about 2.5 hours south from here, I'd put in about 200 or 300 laps around that track on a set of Corsa. It's not perfect, but I had a really good understanding of the track layout, had a good understanding of brake markers, reference points, and also I understood where the key corners that I really wanted to focus my efforts on were on that track. And that really got me up to speed a lot quicker. Rather than wasting an entire practice day learning the track, I was basically able to come out of the pits on the first practice session and be relatively up to speed within that first 20-minute session. So yeah, I think that's really important. The other thing I've been using that for as well, with our events being, well, they're called endurance races. It's an hour long. I know there's some people who are going to argue that an hour event is not an endurance race, but that's what they're calling it, so it is what it is. But I found that getting my concentration levels on point for a full hour of racing does take a little bit of time. It's very easy to have your attention just drift away a little bit and miss a braking marker by 2 or 3 meters, and all of a sudden you've dropped 3 or 4 tenths on that particular lap. And just doing iRacing and in a league where we were doing endurance events similar length, time and time again, getting practice on the sim really brought me up to speed. So yeah, powerful way. And also, I think it's worth mentioning, you don't need to start by spending a fortune on your sim. There are some really cheap options in terms of wheels and pedals that'll at least get you started and out there doing it.
Yeah. All right. So Dave and Derek both have real similar questions here about trail braking, coasting, being on the throttle through a corner. Uh, Again, so coasting on a racetrack is one of those things that is another huge topic in itself. Coasting
Yeah.
from it's easy to say coasting is always bad, but coasting is actually one of the most granular, high-end techniques that you'll ever approach on a racetrack, because there are very specific applications for it, and generally, if you don't already know them, you shouldn't be trying to exploit them. Um,
Yep.
so maybe a future one of these we'll talk about coasting a little bit. But so the easy way to get into the answers for Derek and Dave is, in general, you should always be doing something, even if you're in a constant radius corner. the fact that you are producing friction from side force on those tires is going to be naturally resisting forward motion of the car. So you're going to have to be feeding a little bit of throttle into the car just to keep a constant speed. So
Yep.
and there was also an earlier question somewhere as to whether or not, is slow in, fast out still the right way to approach things. And the easy answer to all of these is those are fantastic places to start. If you're just learning a track, go taking late apexes everywhere, and which is sort of a natural extension of a slow in, fast out technique.
Yep.
Just make your apexes as late as possible, and then if you see that you're not using all of the exit, start backing those apexes up a little bit. And you just want to minimize the time that you're not doing anything behind the wheel. So
Yep.
yeah, I would say for those, and Andre, I'd love to hear kind of what you think about those longer corners where you're in areas of sort of maintenance throttle. How do you approach that to maximize your effectiveness in those situations?
I feel like I've said this time and time again, but I could speak for half an hour on this. So let's try and keep it brief. So there's two different aspects there. So the argument that we hear is if you're not accelerating, you're braking, and you're never doing nothing. That's something I hear thrown around a lot. And this was actually something that our pro driver that we went through that course with really drummed into me, is that yes, there can and sometimes is a place where literally coasting is the right thing to do. Let's talk about your long constant radius corner though, where obviously, yes, we're going to be maintaining some throttle. We saw a section of the racetrack, our local racetrack, in that video that I showed, which is an example of this. It's a very, very long, it's about 120-degree corner. We take it at about 140 kilometers an hour, and we're maintaining somewhere between maybe 15 to 20% throttle through there. And this is a really good opportunity to see exactly how your throttle application manipulates the handling balance of the car. Because it's such a long corner, what we can do is just gradually, slowly apply a little bit more throttle, which will build up our speed, and you're going to find the limit of the car's grip. Be that front end or rear end, you're either going to get the car starting to run wide or understeering wide. And when we get to that point, we can manipulate the throttle and back off a little bit. That'll transfer a small amount of weight forward that's going to reinstate grip. So basically, by manipulating the throttle just very small amounts, we can just get the car set up right on the limit of adhesion. Exactly the same with if the car tends to be a little bit loose or oversteery. However, it's just difficult. There's not a lot of black and white, as I've already said before, with motor racing. And to state outright that we should never be just coasting, that's not always the case. And one of the things which our pro driver did bring in, a constant, because he does a lot of driver coaching as well, a constant thing he sees drivers doing wrong, novice drivers doing wrong, is feeling like they need to get on the throttle too soon. So if we look at a geometric position for our apex in the center of the corner, that's the point where the car is producing maximum lateral G-force. And as we know from the traction circle that we looked at earlier in the webinar, when we've got maximum lateral G-force, there's nothing left for accelerating or braking. So by definition, at the apex, if we are at the limit of adhesion, we can't accelerate the car. Now we can hold constant speed, that's a little bit different, but we can't accelerate the car. And what we see is this is normally an upshot of the driver coming into the corner, braking too early, overslowing the car, and basically getting to the apex of the corner, realizing by the time they get to the apex that they've made a mistake and they're too slow, and then they get back on the throttle too soon. And what this tends to do is then compromise the corner exit. So getting on that throttle too early is going to end up with the car either oversteering or understeering wide of the corner, resulting in you having to lift back off the throttle. So when you've got that situation, you get to the apex of the corner. This is a slightly different angle from the question, but I think it's important to mention. If you're getting to that point and you realize you're too slow and you're wanting to get on the throttle, just understand for the next lap, the problem was actually the previous sector. The problem was you either braked too early or you overslowed the car. Fix that, and then the rest of the corner will naturally come to you. I also just wanted to mention about the apex location, or the slow in, fast out. And again, what that really comes down to is the corner, the particular corner on the track we're looking at. So it's not just about the corner. That's not the only thing we need to focus on. It's what does that corner lead onto. So a classic example would be a slow corner leading onto a long straight. In that situation, it would be more typical to brake, slow the car more so we can turn the car tighter, aim for a late apex further around the corner, which opens up the corner exit and therefore allows us to get on the throttle sooner. Now, if we had a speed overlay of what that would look like, we would be giving away a little bit of time and speed at the corner entry where we need to over slow the car in order to rotate it through the corner. But by doing that and then opening up the exit of that corner, we can then get back to full throttle sooner, and that will give us an advantage the whole way up the next straight, which is why it lends itself so well to slow corners leading onto long straights. Without getting too deep into it, obviously if we've got a double corner or a corner leading into another corner, we may need to manipulate our apex location to suit that combination. So that's my thoughts on that, JG. Hopefully that you can agree with that.
Yeah, no, that was some great explanations. And so I know we have to cut things off here soon, so I'm going to basically combine all the rest of our questions into one, because they all sort of lead to the same place. Chris with another great question here. So Chris is mentioning that in autocross he's been taught to only ask the tire to do one thing at a time. Why is trail braking not as prevalent? And to follow that up, we've got several questions from Namdi and Billy and Paul about the difference between front-wheel drive and rear-wheel drive, all-wheel drive, mid-engine cars, rear-engine cars, how they affect things. So to start with Chris's question, I not to take anything away from any of your instructors, but I think they were maybe phrasing that poorly, where they maybe instead of saying that you've been taught to only ask the tire to do one thing at a time, I think what's more correct way to express that is a tire can only do 100% of anything at only it can only use 100% of its grip in one direction at a time.
Yeah.
If you have to do something else, you need to take some force away from one direction to apply it to another direction. So if you're using 100% of that tire's potential, yes, it can only be in one direction. So that's where we get into stuff like trail braking, or even feeding throttle coming out of a corner. If you start to accelerate a car, you've got to take some cornering speed away, and if you start to brake a car, you've got to take some cornering force away as well. And I think where that ties into the front wheel drive versus rear wheel drive versus mid engine versus front engine, the difference. All of those cars are using the same tires, and all of those tires have to adhere to the same laws of physics. What's going to be different about those cars is how quickly and how thoroughly they transfer the load to those different tires. So a rear engine car under braking is going to transfer less of a load relative to its entire weight to the front. So your braking performance is not going to be necessarily better or worse. It's just going to be different, and you have to realize that those front wheels are not going to load quite as fast, and that's mostly something you're going to be dealing with through the mechanical setup of the car rather than technique. Now, when it comes to trail braking, a front wheel drive car versus a rear engine car into a corner, again, that could be a whole other evening of chat on its own. In a front wheel drive car, sometimes you are forced to do things that would seem unnatural in other cars just to force the issue of weight transfer, to put load on certain tires. But yeah, so no matter how a car is laid out, no matter how much a car weighs or where that weight is, those four tires all have to adhere to the same level of physics, the same the same laws of friction. that any other car does. It's just going to be what is the interaction that you're looking for, and how quickly is it happening. Does that sound right to you, Andre? Have I explained that
Yeah,
correctly?
yeah, I think I'll go a little deeper as well, because there's a lot more to it that's going to make up the natural handling balance of a car, other than just whether it's front engine, mid engine, rear engine, whether it's front wheel drive, four wheel drive, or rear wheel drive. And that's the part that we it's very easy to overlook. So the type of suspension system, whether we're talking double wishbone or McPherson strut, multi-link, live rear end, the camber gain curve, the way the roll center height and the gradient of the roll centers front to rear is set up, anti-roll bars, all of these aspects are going to ultimately affect the natural handling balance of a particular car. So that's important to understand in and of itself. And then it's a case of understanding the tools that are available to us as the driver in order to modify and exploit that natural handling balance to suit our own aims. And we've talked about trail braking, how that can help a car rotate, or maybe it can reduce a natural tendency to oversteer. And that goes really irrespective of the type of car we're dealing with. It's about testing and finding what that handling balance is, what the car is doing that you like, what the car is doing that you don't like, and then understanding what you can do as a driver in order to manipulate that. So I'd probably just add that in there. Again, I know it's not very helpful, but when it comes to racing, there's a lot of shades of grey here, and just understanding those background principles is so key.
Yeah, and I think the portion of this discussion on trail braking and how you explained it with your traction units. In fact, if you guys sell those traction units, I would like to order a few, because those seem very, very handy when it comes to setting a car up. But that's a great way to think about it. And no matter how your car is configured, you still only have 100% of each individual tire's grip available.
Yeah.
And how your car is configured, the only thing that's going to affect is how the load gets to those tires eventually. It's still up to the driver to manage that load on each of those tires.
Yeah, one of the most important things on a race car, and you'll hear just about any professional race engineer talk about, is how critical the tire is. And it really comes down to, it doesn't matter if it's your road car that you're taking to a track day, or you've got a $500,000 GT3 car. Ultimately, no matter what else is done to the car, it's the contact patch between those four tires that's going to dictate how quickly you can get that car around the track. So understanding the way the tire works, understanding the implications of load transfer, and optimizing that tire contact patch is really the key to getting the most out of that tire, which in turn allows you to get the most out of the car. I'll just also mention a part of that other topic about only asking the tire to do one thing at a time. Obviously, during the webinar today, we have talked mainly about trail braking, and again, we've got a limited time here, so we can't cover every potential topic. But as you alluded to there, JG, we have exactly the same, only in reverse, when we're on the corner exit. Whereas once we get past the apex, we want to start accelerating the car. Again, if we're at maximum lateral cornering force, there's nothing available from the tires to allow acceleration. So we need to naturally start unwinding some of that steering lock. So we're not asking for so much lateral G-force, so that we can begin to start adding throttle and beginning to produce some longitudinal accelerating G-force. And again, that's just riding the other edge of the rim of the traction circle for our acceleration, as opposed to our braking. So yeah, definitely the tire, as you say, it's able to do a certain amount, and we want to just exploit as much of that as we can in terms of our combined corner entry and our combined corner exit. Have we got any more in there, JG?
A couple we could probably deal with quickly. Somebody asked earlier, and I apologize, I forget who, but they were asking about how they can find out about different brake pad compounds and how they will affect your braking and what they might be ideal for. Every manufacturer of high performance brake pads is going to have a chart somewhere on their website that essentially shows what temperature range those brakes are going to operate in, what what they're best for, and sort of what friction profile they're going to have.
Yep.
Our Corvette project car uses Willwoods. Right now we're using their BP40 compound, which is a compound that needs a little bit of temperature in it to work, but it doesn't need much. And as soon as it gets that temperature, it stays very consistent throughout a several hundred degree range of temperature. If you're trying to find a pad that is more of an endurance racing pad, that pad might need more heat to work, but it might last quite a bit once it gets up to speed. One thing I'll say is one of the most common questions I get when I go to the racetrack is, I want a pad that I can drive on the street and then take to the track and it works great in both places. And sorry,
The
that
old
doesn't
unicorn
exist.
pad.
Yeah, yeah. You know what? If that pad existed, I would have bought stock in that company, and
Yeah.
I would be there would be a much more elaborate banner behind me. Um, so
Yeah, I think
you're
in a lot of
always
ways, I think it's
yeah.
actually it's harder when you are trying to build a multi-purpose car that you want to be able to daily drive or at least drive on the weekends and also regularly track that car. That's actually harder than building a dedicated race car. And the brake pads are really one of the trickier parts, I think. So yeah, you're absolutely right. I don't know what it's like in the US, but here in New Zealand as well, we obviously don't have local manufacturers. We've only got distributors, and I've found the best results have come from dealing with a company that specializes in brake components and is actually involved in racing. And the reason that works well is that you don't necessarily just have to rely on the manufacturer's chart of compound versus friction of coefficient versus heat temperature range. You can actually leverage off their experience with, well, we've had this pad in a similar car to yours and it works exceptionally. So that's worked well for us in terms of getting pads that we can trust are going to work without having to spend hundreds if not thousands of dollars testing a bunch of different compounds to find the one we like.
Oh, sure, yeah, and it's really very similar here, where in the club racing scene, there's every chance that the rep for any given company, when they're not working a trade show or sitting behind their desk, they're out on track with their own car doing the same thing. So there's a great
Yeah.
knowledge base there. And the thing I recommend to everybody to solve that one brake pad for everything situation is just get two sets of brake pads. They're not that hard to change. Switch
Yep.
them out the Friday before your track weekend, switch them back in Sunday afternoon, and both of your sets, both your street set and your track set, are going to last longer and perform better, and you're going to be happier with the car, and ultimately you're going to spend less money either constantly changing your pads if you're trying to use street pads on the track, or constantly changing your rotors if you're trying to use race pads on cold rotors, that's just tearing them up. So yeah,
Yeah, I
two
think
two
that's
sets of
something that a
pads.
lot of people overlook is if you are using a brake compound that's designed for race use, it's designed for a higher operating temperature window, and if you're not operating in that window, which is where you'd probably be daily driving on the street, yeah, as you kind of alluded to there, you're going to end up chewing through rotors at a phenomenal rate, and that gets really expensive really quickly. All right, JG, I think we're probably going to wrap up. We're just going a little bit long, so I think we've got time for, let's say, one more question. So if we've got another one in there that you'd like to give us?
Let me find a good one here. Um, okay, we'll go with John's question here, and he is asking about tips for endurance racing. Since Andre is doing some endurance racing, it's
Yep.
always good to hear some thoughts. And I'll elaborate on this a little bit by saying we've talked about these techniques sort of without a time factor on them. We've talked about the physics and the relationship between the contact patch under load in a moment, but how is extended time going to change your approach to something like this, and
Yep.
how do you sort of real time monitor how you're able to apply these techniques over the course of a session, whether that session is 15 minutes or an hour and a half?
Okay. All right, so there's a bunch I could talk about here, so I'll just try and keep it to a few key points. And first of all, I'll just reiterate our endurance racing, as I've said, it's an hour race, so a lot of people would sort of snicker a little bit to themselves when we call that an endurance race. But an hour is still a fair bit of time in the car. And what's important to understand with a race that is that length is that the handling balance of the car is naturally going to change. We start with 110 kilograms of fuel or 100 kilograms of fuel in the car. That burns down over the course of the race, so the handling balance will change. And one of the key things, which I've just come off the back of that win, so I'll talk to that experience, is managing the tyres as well. While a sprint race that's 6 or 8 laps, we could literally drive the car at 10 tenths or maybe beyond the limit for the entire race and probably not compromise the tyre too much. If we try and do that for an hour or more of racing, we're going to completely rinse the tyres. The grip's going to go away, and while you might be fast in the first 5 to 10 laps, you're really going to suffer in the end. So one of the key things I'll point out is in that race that I've just done, we had one competitor that was actually a little bit faster than us. I managed to get a jump on him off the start and stay ahead for about the first 3 or 4 laps, but it was really clear straight away that the car was faster than me. I was holding him up, I was driving defensive lines, and I was overdriving my car in order to try and stay in front. So about 4 laps in, I made the conscious decision that it wasn't worth trying to fight. I wasn't going to be able to hold him off for 60 minutes, and the smarter decision was to let him go and concentrate on my own race, and that's exactly what I did. Pulled back the pace a little bit, and that meant that I was driving within the capability of the tyres, and ultimately we ended up winning based on a pit stop strategy. It's a different topic, but yeah, just understanding that trying to drive a defensive race for a whole long stint, that's going to be really difficult. The other part, just with the tyre management there, is there's that very long right-hand corner that we've already talked about a couple of times at our local track, the one that goes through 120 degrees. That's got the left front tyre in particular really heavily loaded for several seconds each lap. And again, if you're just driving on the absolute limit or beyond, it's very quick to notice lap after lap that the performance of the car through that corner goes away. The car becomes more and more prone to understeer. And just by backing off maybe just a tenth or two per lap, it doesn't beat up on the tyre so much, and that allows us to drive faster overall. Even if we're giving away a little bit of lap time, it just means that the tyre's not going to degrade. So there's a lot more to endurance racing compared to sprint racing than just your outright pace. It is a bit of a longer game, unsurprisingly, and understanding sort of aspects like that are important. Pit strategy and strategy in general is another big topic, but again, we could go on about that one alone for hours. I think we'll probably leave it there, JG. And I want to finish up just by saying a huge thanks to everyone who has come along. Hopefully everyone's enjoyed what they've learned. I am sorry if there are a few questions we didn't get to. Just a reminder again, if you did enjoy what you've learned today, that starter package is only available for the next 3 days, $397 if you purchase in one lump sum. Use that payment plan. You can break that down into as many as 8 weekly payments of just $49. I'll mention if you do that as well, you get instant access to all of the course material as soon as your first payment is processed. No need to wait 8 weeks to start learning. And remember, you're completely protected with that 60-day no questions asked money back guarantee, so zero risk. While we're at it as well, another prop for Grassroots Motorsport. It's been great having you along today, JG, helping out. You've had some great input yourself, and for all those who have watched, yeah, go give GRM a follow as well. They put out some really great information. So thanks again, JG.
Yeah, thanks for having us. Always a pleasure to talk to you guys. I actually had to look it up. We are 9,000 miles away from each other, so just to be able to chat with somebody what a third of the way around the world, and have some really fun interactions with a great and knowledgeable audience. It's always a pleasure. So thanks for having us aboard. We're on the web at grassrootsmotorsports.com. If you're over on YouTube, hit that subscribe button, like they all say, and you get first crack. We have tech stuff and feature cars and expanded stuff from the magazine going up on YouTube all the time. So welcome to check us out there. And yeah, thanks to our friends at HP Academy for having us aboard tonight.
Yeah, thanks a lot, JJ. And for everyone watching, hopefully we can see you online again in the future. Thanks for coming along.